Welcome, everyone. My name is Victor Glass. I'm your host for the webinar, Electrification of Buildings, Pragmatic Challenges. I'd like to thank Jim Lazar for suggesting the topic and identifying speakers. I'd also like to thank Ahmad Faruqui for helping me organize the session. For those of you who are not familiar with the Center for Research in Regulated Industries, its mission is to promote research, scholarship, and education in regulatory economics aimed at improving public policy. Please visit our website. The center has been in existence for more than 40 years. It was founded by Dr. Michael Crew, who ran it for decades. I am the current director and host. The main focus is on utility regulation, electric utilities, water, gas, postal, and telecom. And I'd just like to make this special announcement. We're now restarted our Eastern and Western conferences. They're going to be in person. Please visit our website, and I hope you participate. Electrification is an enormous national policy right now. This webinar focuses on the practical challenges of building conversion to electricity. We've asked the panelists to evaluate what is the current penetration rate of heat pumps in existing customer premises and in new construction. What is the second basic question is, what is the cost of retrofitting existing premises to use renewable electricity instead of fossil fuels? The third is, what is the cost of using renewables as opposed to fossil fuels for new construction? Here's a critical one is, what is the payback period in states with high electricity rates? And what policies are being pursued to lower payback periods in all states? And finally, a key issue is, what is the effect of electrification on the energy burden of low-income customers? To answer these challenging questions, we've gotten together a group of very qualified people to address them. And our moderator today is Ahmad Faruqui. Our panelists are Jim Lazar, Alex Rammel, Carol Weston, and Will Zia. And I will give you a brief thumbnail bio for each person so that you can see that they have the qualifications to handle these types of questions. Ahmad Faruqui, since 1978, he's been working on a wide range of issues involving the efficient use of energy. In his career, he's worked for more than 100 clients on 5 continents. And I guess if global warming continues, he might be looking for clients on the 6th continent. Never know. His areas of expertise include load forecasting, demand-side management, energy conservation, demand response, electrification, and rate design. He's published 4 books on issues related to energy efficiency and more than 100 articles and papers in scholarly and trade publications. Besides that, he's looked into electrifying his house, putting in heat pumps, so he has a lot of practical experience as a homeowner. Our second speaker, our first speaker is Jim Lazar, and he's based in Olympia, Washington. He's worked on education, training, and technical studies in electricity around the world. Jim is the author of Electricity Regulation in the United States, plus important handbooks on electric cost allocation, rate design, and utility resource planning. Jim retired from the Regulatory Assistance Project in 2020, but continues to work for a very limited number of clients in global energy policy. Currently, Jim is a fellow at Pace University Institute for Energy Democracy. Representative Alex Rammel was appointed to the Washington State Legislature in January 2020. Last year, he was the prime sponsor of HB 1287 to require consistent planning standards for vehicle electrification. He has also introduced bills to enable public electric utilities to help their customers switch to clean electric appliances, require gas utilities to develop clean, hard decarbonization plans, and require heat pumps for most space and water heating applications in new construction. Representative Rammel has served on the 2020 Washington State Energy Strategy Task Force and now serves as an ex officio member of the State Building Code Council. Representative Rammel's past experiences include being the author of Bellingham's first local climate action plan, founder of the Community Energy Challenge, Energy and Policy Director for Sustainable Connections. He's a graduate of Western Washington University's Huxley College of the Environment with a BA in Environmental Policy and Planning. Carol Weston is the Managing Director of Vermont's statewide energy efficiency utility called Efficiency Vermont. Efficiency Vermont was created in 1999 by the Vermont Legislature and the Vermont Public Utility Commission. In 2008, Efficiency Vermont received authorization to offer thermal efficiency services to all Vermonters to help them reduce their use of fossil fuels, improve their comfort, and save on heating costs. Carol oversees the delivery of energy efficiency services to all Vermonters and leads a team of innovators, implementers, engineers, and collaborators. Her focus is on helping Vermonters transition to a just, clean energy future. Prior to joining Efficiency Vermont, Carol served as city engineer for the city of Burlington, Vermont. A professional civil engineer by training, Weston holds a bachelor's degree from the University of Vermont and a master's degree in environmental engineering from Tufts University. William Zia is from Con Ed. He's a project manager, energy efficiency there, and he's also the co-chair of Joint Management Committee, New York State Clean Heat Program. As a project manager, Will is responsible for designing and implementing the company's 2020 to 2025 New York State Clean Heat Program plan in accordance with the New York State's renewable energy and emissions reduction goals. In his role as co-chair of the New York State Clean Heat Program Joint Management Committee, he promotes the effective adoption of innovative cold climate heat pump technologies and effectively integrate them into the utility grid. The format for the webinar is that it will be a panel discussion moderated by Ahmad Faruqui, followed by open discussion. Please turn off your microphone and video camera, and please direct your comments to Ahmad through the Q&A window. Feel free to also use the chat option for offline discussion. And with that, I will stop sharing and hand it over to Ahmad.
Well, thank you very much, Victor. This was a topic that we had been chatting about for several months, so I'm glad the moment has finally arrived when we will get a chance to cover some of the basic challenges that face what everyone probably agrees is a good thing to do from a climate change and a societal perspective, which is manage the challenge that stands in the way of people embracing and adopting heat pumps, in particular in homes, and similar technologies in commercial buildings. Just from the standpoint of the conversation we are about to embark upon, I would like to say that as you have mentioned and as you have introduced each of the panelists, we have 4 speakers. We want to make sure there's enough time for Q&A at the end. So I'm going to request that each panelist confine their remarks to 11 to 12 minutes each. and I will give them an alert at the 1 minute marker. In other words, 1 minute to go. And I hope I don't have to cut anyone off, but in the interest of equality of speaking time among the panelists, I want to make sure the last speaker doesn't get reduced to 5 minutes because the others took 15 each, you know, that kind of game. A couple of the regular attendees of the Rutgers webinars have also told me to exercise my authority if it comes to it, but I hope I don't have to. I will have my phone acting as a stopwatch, so I will be timing each of the presentations. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Jim Lazar. Jim needs no introduction. You already have introduced him, but I want to say a couple of personal words of thanks to him. He and I go back many, many years in this particular field. Sometimes we have had different opinions. Sometimes we have had the same opinion, but it's always a pleasure to chat with him. Both of us started a conversation that has now grown into the Electricity Brain Trust, which now has almost 600 members. If you're not a member of the Electricity Brain Trust and would like to be added, either let Jim or me know by sending us an email and we'll get you plugged in. We have people there from all continents, including the sixth one. And we have a lot of interactive discussion that takes place there. The other thing I'd like to mention is that I have imitated Jim in many ways, and so I'll be doing that imitation very soon in another sphere, which is I'll be retiring end of December after this long career in energy. But unlike him, I'm actually going to fully retire, will have no clients other than my wife and daughters. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Jim. Jim, it's all yours.
Well, thanks, Ahmad and Victor, and it's great to be with everybody. I'm going to try and set the table for a discussion of some of the challenges to electrification, and there are many. It will have some bumps. I'm a co-author of the RAP 4-part publication on beneficial electrification, one overview, and one on electrification of transportation, space heat, and water heat. I'm going to go over some of these bumps. Rates are going to be a challenge. Buildings will be a challenge. Distribution systems will be a challenge. Transmission systems will be a challenge. And there will be challenges to the generation system. And I'll touch quickly on each of these. California and New England have high electricity rates, shown here in red and to a lesser extent in yellow. For the rest of the country, electrification is going to save consumers money. Heat pumps that are 300% efficient, heat pump water heaters that are nearly that efficient are going to produce lower bills. But in the areas with high rates, and we're fortunate to have Carol and Will here from states that do have higher rates, the challenges are going to be a little bit more serious. I'll start with buildings. All right, about half of American homes are heated with natural gas, about a third with electricity, shown here in blue. If we double the number of houses heated with electricity without doing anything, then our electricity load in the winter will soar, and that will be very, very challenging for the electricity grid for generation, transmission, and distribution perspectives. Efficiency is the key. If we can cut the electricity consumption of the existing electrically heated homes in half with insulation and lighting and heat pump water heaters and heat pumps and other efficient appliances and modifications, we can free up enough electricity to serve pretty much the rest of the building stock. So efficiency is an extremely important part of any electrification plan. Our houses have lots of appliances, heat pumps for heating and cooling, laundry equipment, water heating, refrigerators, dishwashers, and entertainment equipment. And off on the right are electric vehicles. If we don't manage these loads, they could add up to a lot. This just adds up: space conditioning, electric vehicle, water heat, major appliances, and lights and minor appliances. If everything was running at the same time, the house could draw 22 kilowatts. On average, across the day in the year, a house draws 1 to 2 kilowatts. We're going to have to manage these appliances, and many of them are manageable. In particular, we can shift the electric vehicle charging into times when power is cheap and the grid has capacity. Water heat can be controlled. If we can precondition spaces on particularly hot days and control when we use our major appliances, we can take the peak load of that house down by a factor of 6 or so. And once it's that low, that can be covered by an on-site battery. And so the house could conceivably have no draw on the grid at all when the grid is under stress. That flexible demand is going to be an essential part of electrification. And in cold climates and for power outages, I think that most people are going to want some way of heating their home independent of a grid electricity supply, whether that's a propane heater or a propane fireplace insert, something that we've got in our house, or a thermal storage electric heater that would charge when the grid has capacity and carry customers through when it may be not working. I think that some kind of supplemental heat, particularly in cold climates, is going to be an essential part of this. It won't run very much, maybe 1% of the time. Distribution grids are going to have challenges. The little transformers that serve our houses when we have gas heat are going to need to be upgraded. But one good piece of good news here is distribution systems have more capacity in the winter because when it's cold, the heat is released from the wires and the transformers this year. But we know how to do that. And we also know how to manage our loads with smart thermostats. So when the grid is reaching capacity, a smart grid will know how to adapt in order to make sure that things remain reliable. Substation capacity is going to have to increase. And one thing we will see, and I just talked with someone today at a utility that's going to be doing this, adding batteries to substations increases dramatically the capacity of those substations during key hours. And as battery costs are coming down, they're going to be an important part of electrification. Transmission is going to be a challenge. A lot of our renewable energy resources are built in places that are far from the loads. We will need new transmission connections to bring them to us. And in order to use that transmission efficiently, we will need batteries at the site of some of these transmission substations and generating plants to smooth out the flow of power from the wind and solar farms to the communities via limited transmission capacity. Generation is also going to be a challenge. Peak and energy loads will be a lot higher, and we're going to need more generation. Wind, solar, in particular. That's so cheap now that other alternatives are simply not in the market. I mean, gas is more expensive than wind and solar. Nuclear is 3 times the cost of wind and solar. So we're going to see a lot more wind and solar. We're going to need more storage at our generating stations to smooth out the flows from our variable generation resources. Fortunately, storage is getting cheaper and cheaper. We're going to need more flexible loads, such as the control box on this electric water heater. A water heater holds a whole day's worth of hot water for the typical family. And if we can control the water heater to charge when the sun is shining and the wind is blowing and the grid has capacity, and then store that water for us to use when we want to do laundry and take showers, we'll have a much more flexible and much stronger system. And perhaps we may need some biofuel operating in conventional peaker generating plants. Hawaiian Electric has built a biofuel powered very flexible generating plant on Oahu, and I think we will see more of our conventional units converted to use storable biofuels. If petroleum had not existed naturally, we would have needed to invent it to get as far as we have. And I do see a small but important role for liquid biofuels, easy to store and flexible to use. This is going to be a very, very tough challenge. If we get it right, we will feel terrific and we will have a much, much better planet. I hope we can. I thank you, and I look forward to hearing from our other speakers as they talk about these practical challenges.
Wow, that was very impressive, Jim. A great overview, and actually you gave us some time back from your allotment. So certainly, I'm sure the other speakers will benefit to some extent, and I already have 3 questions that I want to put to you, but I'll save them to the end. So thank you again. It's Carol's turn. We'll hear the perspective from Vermont. That's a beautiful state. I've been there just once. I'm planning to visit that a bit more once I am fully retired. So Carol, over to you.
Thank you. Yeah, we look forward to having you here when you have time to come. And thanks everyone for joining. My name is Carol Weston. I am Managing Director of Efficiency Vermont. And Victor did a great job of introducing Efficiency Vermont. We're a statewide energy efficiency utility. We are regulated by the Vermont Public Utilities Commission, and we offer both electric and thermal efficiency services to Vermonters all around the state, with the exception of Burlington, our largest city, and that is served by its own electric municipal utility. Some of the things that we do in order to support Vermonters as it relates to energy efficiency programs include direct support through incentives, technical assistance, customer support lines. We do a fair amount of education and outreach. We also work with the supply chain, our contractors, our distributors, manufacturers, and their representatives to get equipment into the state. And we partner with energy service providers all over the state and others in order to deliver these services. So we're part of a large network. I'm going to talk today about some of the practical challenges of implementing and getting folks to adopt these electrification technologies. So Jim did a wonderful job of giving us a broad landscape. I'm going to focus in on a part of that. Hopefully some of these topics are interesting to you all. I want to start first by talking about the technology and the building types and some of the challenges we face in a cold climate with, as you heard, relatively high electricity rates. So you're looking here at a graph of heat pump adoption over the past 6 years or so in Vermont. We've had very, very big adoption since we began working with the supply chain and our partners. And the best performing cold climate heat pumps right now are the ductless systems. The problem with ductless systems is that they're not going to get us to 100% heating load in the bulk of buildings, right? So we need centrally ducted and air to water solutions. The centrally ducted equipment is improving quite well. The issue that remains is that old leaky undersized ductwork that's in people's homes or businesses that creates that major technical challenge. And while air to water heat pumps have come a long way, it still has challenges associated with cooling that makes it a little bit of a harder sell, and still requires a bit of fossil fuel backup. So for the price of the system, having to still have backup after that does bring up a barrier. In terms of cold climate heat pumps and heat pumps in general, all of this must be paired with HVAC, weatherization improvements, controls, things of that sort. That really has to be a part of the solution. And so it's a much more comprehensive conversation we're having with folks. The other thing I wanted to point out is around the housing stock. So different buildings will offer different opportunities as it relates to electrification. And I just want to take a minute to talk about multifamily buildings, for example. We have a fair amount of those in Vermont. I'm sure all of you do as well. There are some fundamental differences in multifamily and commercial buildings that make electrification potentially a little bit more easy to achieve. In multifamily buildings, most units will have maybe 1, at the most 2 exterior walls, dropping the heat load, making it a little bit more of an option to have ductless heat pumps do the job. Their units tend to be smaller, so potentially the heat pump can do the whole work there. On the commercial side, there's also a good deal of load diversity. It's not uncommon for a building to need simultaneous heating and cooling. And so sometimes the heat some types of heat pumps that can share energy between spaces without even running the compressor really start to create a boost in the economics for a commercial building to go electric in terms of its heating and cooling load. So those are just some of the things to consider. There are some notable exceptions to building types, specifically with historic buildings. We have quite a lot of those in the Northeast, and there's potentially limited opportunities to do shell improvements if there are historical features that have to be preserved. So that's just something to note. One other thing that's interesting in Vermont is that a large percentage of homes do not have ductwork. They have boilers, and so without that, we need air to water heat pumps or potentially many ductless heat pumps in order to create 100% of the heat load. It's just not adequately able to do the job right now, as I sort of mentioned before. So we've got some heating, some building type challenges. New construction is really a slam dunk. There's a lot of opportunity there, as many of our homes are now being built to code, and heat pumps there are kind of an easy way to get to 100% of the load. I also want to mention refrigerants. So the current refrigerants in heat pumps have a pretty high global warming potential. We note that because greenhouse gas emissions are the goal here. And so if we electrify and then have equipment that is leaking greenhouse gases, it seems a little bit counterintuitive. So Efficiency Vermont's been working with partners in our region and around the country and working with manufacturers to see if it's possible to get heat pumps with a lower global warming potential refrigerant in them. And that development is underway. In the meantime, though, we're really focusing on leveraging best practices when it comes to installing heat pumps, and also, when possible, opting for systems with a lower total charge, things that are packetized, heat pump water heaters, air to water heat pumps, rooftop units, and chillers. So some of those equipment use less charge and less than global warming potential leaking as well. The cost is going to be a big issue for us in Vermont, in the Northeast as well. I've got a couple of graphs here to just show you some things about what's going on here in Vermont. So we have about 50% of our heating load is fuel oil and propane. We don't actually have a high natural gas amount, sort of heating load in Vermont. Only about a quarter of our heating load comes from natural gas. So there's a lot of electrification opportunity. And then the lower table that you're seeing on this slide shows kind of the variability in cost among different heating sources. So in terms of electricity, it can be a very stable, price point. However, it's not always the cheapest one. So getting to 100% of heating load in existing buildings is very cost prohibitive. 80% of fossil fuel reduction is actually a very viable option with the technology I described on the last slide, and just also where we're able to go in Vermont with the buildings that we have. And so that's something we're really focused on, is what is the sort of best bang for the buck in terms of how to reduce those fossil fuels. But we also, of course, always remember that any wasted fuel creates that long-term, potentially very untenable cost burden for low and moderate income customers. And so I'll just harken back to the point I made on the first slide, which is that using very efficient technologies and weatherizing wherever possible are going to be the key. In Vermont and in the Northeast in general, our workforce is actually a challenge for us here. So we need a lot more people in the trades in order to wholesale electrify our homes. So we've got to have a much bigger workforce. We have fewer people going into the trades. We have people leaving the trades. We have wages that aren't as compelling, and we have a high cost of living and housing issues going on. So there's a lot of societal issues that are coming to bear as it relates to the workforce with electrification as well. And I just wanted to note it because it's something that we talk about almost every time we talk about programming. This was also mentioned already, but certainly in order to electrify, we need to make sure that the grid has the capacity and the accessibility needed for us to optimize the benefits of electrification. Vermont's grid is largely carbon-free, so electrification is definitely a great pathway for reduction of greenhouse gases. And certainly we want to be using electricity during the times of day when it makes the most sense. That's very cost effective. It reduces greenhouse gas emissions. But in order to do that, we need those load management technologies that Jim talked about in the very beginning. And so really making sure that we control technologies where possible. And the other barrier that we're noticing is that connection to broadband and having internet access statewide is not something that we can take for granted. It's not everywhere. And so broadband connection is actually going to be another very key barrier to overcome when it comes to electrifying wholesale in the state. Oops, sorry, I advanced my slides and they weren't responding, and then I just went past the last one. So the last point I want to make is about equity. And this gets to that question about the burden for low and moderate income customers. Electrification programs absolutely have to consider how to bring everyone along in that and making sure that it's a key pathway for everybody. And so some of the things that we're thinking about are, creating performance requirements around equity, similar to the performance requirements we already have around efficiency and greenhouse gas reduction, prioritizing stakeholder engagement, making sure that we're tailoring approaches to the needs of all of our customers, paying more to help those technologies become accessible to people to adopt, and finally seeking feedback from our participants and non-participants as to why they are or aren't taking advantage of the programs that we have to offer. So those are my thoughts. I hope that they're helpful to the conversation. I look forward to hearing from our next speaker, and I'm going to stop sharing here now.
Thank you very much, Carol. That was extremely helpful, and I love all the details you provided. So what we will do next is go further down south on the East Coast, travel from Vermont to New York. Also one of my favorite destinations. I was actually there just 2 weeks ago, spent 5 days, 3 full days. What a beautiful place it is. One of the big challenges that Jim mentioned, and I'm going to reiterate before Will begins his presentation, is how to deal with a situation where electric rates are high and where a lot of the houses have natural gas as their primary heating source, also their primary source for water heating. That's exactly what we have in California. And couple that with the fact that electric rates might be going up further and further as we go out in time, to improve reliability, to ensure resilience, and to meet climate change goals. So how do you promote heat pumps in a state with high electric rates and a lot of customers already on gas? Do you ban gas? Do you put a tax on gas prices? Do you give a discount on electric rates? Do you arrest people installing gas? What do you do? How do you break that logjam? Because I can tell you, sitting out here 2,500 miles to the west in California, that's exactly the situation we have here. I have personally looked into heat pumps twice as a customer, back in 2016 for space heating and air conditioning, and again this year in the summer for my water heating. And both times the analysis showed that my capital cost would be higher and my operating costs would be higher. So why would I do it as a customer, despite being a big fan of electrification? If the payback is not only long, but it's negative, why would anybody in their right mind invest in something that'll give them no return? And then I talked to the contractors. None of them were promoting heat pumps, at least in California. I talked to a guy at Lowe's who was selling water heaters. I said, how about that heat pump water heater, which he had not pointed out to me? He said, oh yeah, do you want your electric bills to go through the roof? And I said, no. He said, do you have solar? I said, yes, I have solar, but I don't have excess capacity in my solar. I already have an electric car. So he said, then just to stop mentioning heat pumps. So this is the contractor challenge, the manufacturer challenge, and the customer challenge, at least in the Golden State. So I'm really anxious to see how Will is going to address this in the Empire State. So over to you, Will. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much, Ahmad, for that intro. Very good points to bring up, and I think they're the right points to bring up, especially given our service territory and the climate in particular. Thank you. Just to kind of give an intro for myself, my name is Will Shah. I am a program manager here on the Energy Efficiency and Demand Management team at Con Edison. We are one of the electric utilities in New York State, but we are also unique in the sense that we are a combined utility. We provide electric, gas, and steam. Oh, thank you very much, Alex, for the assist here. So yes, just to start things off as to who we are and who Con Edison is, right? We primarily serve the customers in the New York City and Westchester area. There's the primary utility, which is Saccone, Con Edison of New York, that covers the 5 boroughs and Westchester. And we also have a sister utility, which kind of covers Orange and Rockland, as well as the bits and pieces of northern New Jersey. About 3.5 million electric customers, 1.1 million gas customers, which is interesting dynamic, particularly given what Ahmad was saying between the intricacies of the rates, as well as a steam system, district steam in Manhattan. Within Con Edison, on top of being a regulated utility, our energy efficiency group promotes the adoption of energy efficient equipment, including heat pumps, through a variety of upfront incentives. We work closely with our state partners, our New York State Public Service Commission and Department of Public Service to adequately promote clean energy as well as energy efficiency alternatives for all of our customers. Next slide, please. And just kind of quickly adding on to the narrative that Jim and Carol had started, here at Con Edison, we have already been successfully promoting electric heat pump adoption since 2020, right, through what's called the New York State Clean Heat Program. This is a statewide framework laid out in the New Efficiency New York order that came down from our Public Service Commission, which essentially laid out both ambitious budgets and energy reduction targets for each of the state's electric utilities from 2020 through 2025. And the goal of that initiative was to promote electric heat pump technology and displace fossil fuel heating, right? So natural gas, oil, propane, et cetera, et cetera. This study really sought to lay a common framework that the state can work towards, right? So for example, at Con Edison or Orange and Rockland, which is our sister utility, or even the electric utilities further up in New York, all of us offer a common set of heat pump incentives at a consistent structure. This way, contractors, regardless of where you are in New York, will know, how the programs are run, what are the requirements behind it, and essentially what the utilities are looking for in order to be eligible for that incentive. So key point, the structure is the same in order to promote the adoption, where utilities still have the flexibility to set the incentive levels themselves at what makes sense given the specific utility and the economics. Next slide, please. And just a little bit towards our success so far, we have seen a lot of success already in the 1 to 4 family segment. We've seen a lot of customers take us up on these new incentives, right? We have exceeded our statewide goal in 2020 in terms of the energy reductions, right? And we are well on track in 2021 to exceed our statewide goal in that regard. Next slide, please. And just a little bit of context behind what has been successful for us so far in our territory. There's a couple of key drivers. I'll touch upon the first couple, right? From a technology familiarity perspective, we've seen that a lot of key demographics within our city were already familiar with this technology, especially in residential applications. We saw a lot of uptick once we rolled out those new incentives, right? So whether it came to ductless mini splits or even some limited adoption from the central systems, we have been seeing a lot of customers take advantage of the incentives and convert proactively to electric heat pumps. We've also increased a lot of our marketing and outreach, trying to raise customer awareness at the same time, right? both from a customer-facing perspective as well as a contractor-facing perspective. We also work closely with our state partners, NYSERDA, which is the New York State Energy Research and Development Authority, to coordinate on a series of regional community campaigns, right, to generate additional awareness as well as these for the programs. Some of the key points which we touch upon, right, is just awareness in terms of the heat pump, what it can be used for. It can be used for both cooling and heating. Trying to push along the narrative here, right? Building on initial customer awareness of technology, maybe more familiar with the cooling capabilities, but we're really trying to go that extra step, trying to get customers primed and aware that, okay, this technology is a combination and I can use it for heating as well as cooling. Some other success drivers that we've seen, right? We've definitely seen a positive response from the industry, right? A lot of the major manufacturers in seeing the level of incentives that are being offered through the Clean Heat program. Many have, it's piqued their interest. We have a good working relationship with many of these manufacturers and distributors, and they have also started to actively support and provide additional inventory as necessary to meet the demand in our state. And finally, just a quick point on the technical, right? From a savings perspective, one of the key documents that we use to account for the achievement from an energy efficiency perspective is the technical resource manual. We had also recently modified that to better allow for really seeing the true savings of a heat pump conversion. For those of you who have worked with these type of documents, a lot of it is based on a quote unquote like-for-like replacement. But starting in 2020, we were really able to expand that, really account for the fuel switching component to truly account for the level of savings from the unit. Next slide, please. Okay, and this is just the last one to wrap up. Seeing a lot of success in 2020, but with the understanding that we have to keep an eye out for the future, right? Build on our success in the residential segments, go towards the larger building stock, right? Which is very indicative of New York City itself, right? We have a lot of large buildings, large pre-war buildings in our service territory that are converted at a different process than just the 1 to 4 family segment. So some things that we have implemented and are looking to build off of in 2021, a couple of different things, right? We realized the importance of weatherization and envelope, in making the buildings much more efficient, allowing for much more efficiently sized heat pump, and we are reflecting that in our new incentives. We have rolled out a new incentive offering under Clean Heat, which combines heat pump plus weatherization, essentially allowing for higher incentivization for customers and contractors who choose to do both at the same time. We realize the benefits of that. Those are very important, especially given our climate, as well as for peak electric demand considerations. And we are trying to promote this in the industry. Additionally, right, when it comes to integrated controls systems for the heat pump installs, as well as the promotion of the decommissioning of existing fossil fuel equipment, we realize that these do require additional financial incentives to make these worthwhile for our customers, but we do recognize their value in promoting the high heating use that we are looking to see. So we are looking to add adders there, right? Additional kickers for installs in gas-constrained areas, definitely another thing, as well as increasing how much incentives we put behind ground source, as well as large custom projects, recognizing for the customer and contractor economics there. So thanks, everyone. That was just a quick overview of what we had done, what we are currently doing, and what we are looking to do. And many thanks to Alex for the assist here with the slides. I really appreciate it. And now, next speaker up is Alex, I believe.
Yes, that's correct. Thank you very much, Will. That was very informative. And Alex will bring us back to the West Coast, and appreciate your getting those slides. I was still looking for them while you found them, but it worked out great. So I'm going to turn it over to you, Alex. Please give us your perspective. And then what we will do is there are a whole bunch of questions. I have a couple myself. So once you have completed your presentation, I'll begin with putting one question to each of the speakers, to each of you, in other words, and then we'll start going through the Q&A from the audience. So thank you for joining, and please share your perspective.
Thanks, Ahmad. Appreciate the opportunity to be here. I'm going to start off and just step back a little bit and remind us all that almost anywhere you are in the United States this year, the climate crisis has been part of our local headlines. Where I am in Washington State, the heat dome this summer caused unprecedented, off the charts record-setting temperatures.
I'm back in.
Welcome back, Victor. Unprecedented temperatures, and we've also faced year after year of fire seasons that we never faced when I first came to Washington 20 years ago. In other parts of the country, we faced flooding, hurricanes, storms, and we're facing a future where those problems are only going to increase steadily. And so I just want to bring us all back and urge everyone on the call to be thinking deeply about what we can be doing in the coming years to accelerate the solutions to confronting our climate crisis. And so while we're on this call here today, global leaders are in Glasgow discussing how to meet those climate commitments. And so for me, one of the things that really sort of stands out is that we can't hit the targets that we have here in Washington State, nationally or globally. We can't hit those targets without addressing this building sector. In Washington State, the building sector is plus or minus 23% of our greenhouse gas emissions. And unlike the electricity sector, electricity generation sector, and unlike transportation, those emissions are continuing to climb right now. Most of that is a result of burning fossil fuels in buildings, and most of that is a result of space and water heat. So I'm excited because I think Washington State is in a position to take bold action on this sector to confront this challenge. And talk a little bit today about some of the policies that I think address some of the challenges that we're talking about, some of which we heard solutions that I've been taking notes and looking forward to bringing back to legislation we're contemplating in Washington. Just setting the stage for sort of the situation here. Washington State in 2019 passed the Clean Energy Transformation Act, which will move our electric utilities steadily towards carbon-free fuels every year, incrementally increasing targets. So converting our buildings to using electricity, especially for those space and water heating uses, is one of the most significant and important priorities for us on fighting climate change. Historically, Washington State has had low electricity rates. That's especially true in areas with hydro resources. As our population has grown and as we've dealt with protecting our fish and salmon populations more, those hydro resources are a little bit less reliable. And so we need we absolutely need to continue building the clean, renewable electricity sources to meet the future growth. In the maritime, at least in the western side of Washington State, we're maritime climate, and that means that our energy needs are maybe a little bit lower than they are in some other parts of the country, both in the summer and in the winter. Although the heat dome that we experienced last year and the increasing sort of season of smoke that we are experiencing is pushing a lot more folks towards wanting to have air conditioning both in the east and west sides of Washington State. So in the coming couple of years, we have some big steps to take on policy that I will try and break into a couple of buckets. The first is a bucket for new construction, because I think electrification is cost effective right now. for most new construction applications. And I think it's also important to just say that when we're in a boat that's sinking, one of the most important things to do is stop putting new holes in the bottom of the boat. So in my mind, where we can do that most effectively is with our energy code. And so there's several places where that's moving forward. Local governments, I believe, really are leading on this. In Seattle this summer, they passed a local commercial energy code that requires new construction to use heat pumps for most space and water heating applications. I anticipate that within the next week, the city of Shoreline will be just north of Seattle, will be contemplating a similar policy. And here where I am in Bellingham, I anticipate that a local policy along those lines will be adopted before the end of the year. And I anticipate King County will be implementing that similar idea early next year, and more local governments will be following. I think there's excitement around seeing local governments lead in that area. Our state energy code is likely to follow. Currently under consideration, docketed for this year, is commercial space and water heating for requiring heat pumps for most applications again. And anticipate next year we'll be contemplating that for residential. That code, if we adopt it, would go into effect in 2024. The next sort of big policy bucket that I think about is converting existing buildings. That's really the meat of the bell curve, since most of our emissions, well, all of our emissions happening right now are a result of existing buildings, and into the future, most of our emissions will continue to be buildings that are in existence right now. And so we have to address that. That is a more challenging economic equation, Ahmad, as you referenced, making the economics of that pencil out for building owners and building occupants is can be complicated and challenging. I think Will did a great job of emphasizing the ways in which utilities could be constructive and important partners in supporting that transition. In Washington State, as in most other places, our utilities have been working to implement energy efficiency solutions for years. They have a trusted relationship with many of their customers. They have those contractors on speed dial. They know the suppliers and the building supply stores. They have all of those relationships. They know how to get energy efficiency technologies into the marketplace and adopted using their rebate programs, their supplier models, et cetera. We want to turn those same tools towards the needs around electrification, and so and supporting fuel switching. In Washington, we have I won't bore you with the details, but we've got a complicated challenge around our legal framework, and that currently prohibits consumer-owned electric utilities from supporting fuel switching. I am hopeful that in the coming year, we will reverse that and give those electric utilities the option to be partners in this transition. Washington's also adopted a building performance standard, a requirement for large commercial buildings, 50,000 square feet and up, to report energy use, to benchmark that energy use, to develop operations and maintenance plans, to implement best practices for energy efficiency and conservation, and then eventually to implement a building performance standard that will be phased in slowly over time, helping supporting those building owners in reducing the energy use in those large commercial buildings. This coming year, I plan to introduce legislation that will expand that program to include smaller buildings and provide a greater level of incentives for those building owners to meet those performance standards. To some of the discussion that happened earlier, especially where we're talking about small businesses or we're talking about multifamily buildings, we want to make sure that the work that we're asking folks to do on those existing buildings, which we recognize in some cases can be expensive, we want to make sure that that work doesn't drive up cost of housing, the cost of doing business for those companies. So that's legislation that we plan to introduce in January of next year. And then finally, I will mention that I hope to also introduce a clean heating standard for Washington State. Will's presentation makes me all the more excited to do it because of all of the great work that we can see happening when the clean heating standard goes into place in New York. So the big challenges for me and my thinking around this, and I'll leave it with a few questions more than answers on this. Our gas utilities, as we move away from using gas as a primary source of fuel from most buildings, right now the cost of those utilities is spread across a large customer base. If that customer base contracts and assets are stranded, the folks left on that system will be carrying a larger and larger portion of those costs. Over time, we need to make sure that we're solving that problem because that is a massive equity issue, because the folks who can least afford to transition to clean electric sources are going to be the ones stuck with those growing costs, especially as we're seeing gas costs rise right now. I'm also really excited, focused on how we can make sure that the workforce that supported our gas system is able to transition into the important work of implementing these alternate technologies. We need to make sure we carve out a role for the renewable gaseous fuels, renewable natural gas, renewable hydrogen. And then we've talked about it quite a bit already and in the chat, but we need to make sure that as we're doing this, we're moving in parallel to meet that new electric load. In Washington State, we anticipate that the electrification, not just of our buildings, but of our vehicles and growing population is going to mean that over the next 30 years, we're going to see nearly a doubling in our electricity demand. We need to move in parallel to build the new generation and the transmission resources to be able to meet that.
So we are out of time, Alex. I apologize. I'll give you 30 seconds to wrap up.
I'm just about at the end. Thanks.
Okay.
So we just need to meet that demand, and we need to be moving in parallel to build those resources. So with that, I'll wrap up. I'm looking forward to the Q&A and learning more from the other panelists. Thanks for the opportunity to be here.
Excellent. Well, thank you. So here's what I will do. I wish I'd ask all the panelists to please join us, turn on their video and turn on their voice. So I'll ask the first question, then we'll quickly go through the other questions. My first question is going to be addressed to each of the panelists. If each of you could answer it in turn in 1 at the most 2 minutes, and just go in the same sequence as we had when we were going through the panels. The question is, just about every utility I've spoken with in the last 12 months is planning to raise electric rates by significant amounts. We're not talking about single digits, we're talking about numbers in excess of 10%. Some are talking about 15%, some are talking about 20%, and some are whispering 30% over the next few years. And the reasons being given are climate change and resilience in most cases, factors beyond their control. So my question for you is that going to improve the economics of heat pumps, which already have a huge challenge dealing with particularly homes that have natural gas heating? And what is the best way to address it? So 1 minute each, please, beginning with Jim.
I don't think utilities are going to succeed in getting rate increases of that magnitude. That's what state regulators exist for. The cost of capital is currently far below the allowed returns for most of our utilities, and if they file rate cases, they expose themselves to new rate of return requirements that may offset everything that they're seeking. And our gas utilities are also seeking large rate increases as their market diminishes. As Alex mentioned, they either spread their costs over fewer and fewer sales, or as one of the participants suggested, state regulators need to adopt depreciation schedules for the gas utilities to make sure that there are not stranded costs at the end. As utilities replace 6-cent and 10-cent fossil generation with 2-cent and 3-cent wind and solar generation, there will be downward pressure on rates. And for most utilities, those costs flow through their purchase power and fuel adjustment mechanisms. They're not part of the general rate case, but they will offset a lot of the increases that we are seeing. Now, I do think Pacific Gas and Electric, Ahmad, your utility is a special case. It's an extremely expensive utility and is now proposing to underground a lot of overhead lines at very, very high cost. I think that they are desperately trying to find a pathway to a third bankruptcy and are on a path to achieving that goal.
Okay, thank you, Jim. By the way, I should tell you there are other utilities as well who are looking really at what I would say are unprecedented rate increases of 21%, even 30%. Yes, you're right, they probably won't be approved, but I guess the point that I was making is that those objectives are in a collision course. You can't promote greater electric use by raising electric rates. And yes, people tell me that wind and solar are going to drop the rates, but I'm still paying 30 cents. The national average is around 12 or 13 cents. Many utilities are in the 20-cent range. So the customer says, hey, I'd love to get that 3-cent power, but you're not selling it to me at 3 cents. You're selling it to me at a number that's huge magnitude, multiples of that. Carol, what's your take?
Thank you. Yeah, well, I think that upward pressure will continue to be there. The thing I'll add is there's the same sort of pressure on fuel prices. And so while we're experiencing it on the electric side, fuel prices are still going to be going up as well. So I think there's a little bit of a sort of a competition there about which can be the least desirable for people at some point. But I wouldn't be a very good managing director of an efficiency utility if I didn't point out that efficiency is a great answer to any sort of electrical cost increase, whether it's because you're using more energy or the energy costs more. And so I'd say that at the customer level, and I think Jim did a great job of answering at that sort of regulatory and policy utility level, at the customer level, it's going to come down to what are you using for energy? How are you dealing with higher bills? What kind of equipment are you using and how are you controlling it? And I think that that's part and parcel of the larger pathway to electrification. So that conversation will continue with our ratepayers. And to me, that's the benefit that we as efficiency utility folks can provide to our customers.
Great. Val?
Yeah, no, and thanks for that question. I think this issue of rates and increasing rates, right, definitely something that we're very conscious of here at Con Edison. We are very conscious when it comes to potential rate increases for our customers, right? We are very mindful of the burden, especially on our what we call low to moderate income or disadvantaged communities. We are especially aware of the acute burdens that they will face in terms of any transition towards a clean energy economy. So that's definitely first and foremost for us. And we're very mindful of that, especially nowadays with the pandemic going on, right? We're just very, very mindful of that. Energy is a key need for all customers. And we want to mitigate any sort of rate changes for them as possible. Things that, when it comes to the rates, what we can do to mitigate that, right, is, for us, we are very keenly looking at what the peak demand impacts would be, right? Because, rates are driven by, capital expenditures. And as much as we can mitigate the expansion of electric infrastructure to meet the growing peak, right? That's something we want to design towards, right? Make sure everything that we're incentivizing is right-sized right, will not contribute additionally to the peak, which would then, aggravate the need for additional infrastructure, which then needs higher rates. So that's what we want to plan for, right? We want to make sure everything's right sized, plan towards the peak, make sure to mitigate that as much as we can. And weatherization definitely for us is one of the key strategies there, right? Trying to make sure homes themselves are right sized from the get-go, which means you can get away with the smallest and most efficient heat pump as possible, right? So just from the get-go, right size, as efficient as possible, make sure that peak demands are mitigated, right? So that's something we are keeping in mind when it comes to addressing the rate issue. And kind of just piggybacking on what Carol said, from an efficiency standpoint too, a lot of customers are still converting from oil or heating oil or propane, or even in some cases, electric resistance, right? So in those cases, the customer economics do work out better. Yes, the electric rates are more expensive, but potentially from an overall energy perspective, an annual energy perspective, there still represents value there for our customers, right? So depending on which use case, there is additional work there. I guess just sort of like a final point when it comes to rates overall, not just electric and gas. Alex mentioned the sort of the shrinking rate base as more and more customers come off of gas. That's something we definitely want to be mindful of too. I think a term we use here a lot is the orderly transition away from fossil fuels. Keyword on orderly. Which implies time, which means careful thinking and planning with regards to the trade-offs of such a change, right? So we want to both adapt and promote clean energy while also being mindful of our entire rate base, right? And what an orderly transition would look like for everybody.
Got you.
Thanks,
Got you.
Ahmad.
That's very well stated. Thank you. Alex, I've heard in the state of Washington, this legislation specifically designed to address the needs of low-income customers. Could you comment on how electrification and affordability can go hand in hand in your state?
Yeah, I was just trying to remember who it was that said that that you shouldn't compare me to the almighty, you should compare me to the alternative. And I think when we're talking about fuel switching, that's really important to think not about what's the cost of electricity, but what's the comparable cost of the alternative. So in Washington, just 2 weeks ago, our Utilities and Transportation Commission did authorize increase for rates on all 4 of our gas utilities. Where I am, that's an 18% increase for residential customers. And so the changes there are going to have huge impacts on, especially on the low-income customers. And so I think one of the most important things we can be doing, to Carol's point, is supporting energy efficiency for those low-income customers. The low-income weatherization program has a great history. It has been chronically underfunded forever. It's always difficult to make projects pencil when you've got a house that's already in a state of disrepair. So figuring out how we can make investments in things like helping people repair their roof so that it makes sense to insulate underneath it. All of those kinds of things are in my mind, the best way to deal with those problems of unaffordable energy.
Great, thank you. So Jim, you had a suggestion, and I think Jeremy Smithson has agreed to join us as a panelist. Is there some way, Victor, that you can give Jeremy a panelist slot here, because he has some very interesting technology-focused questions and statements that he could make, and then we'll ask each of the panelists to address the other questions that have come up.
Max, are you still on?
He's been promoted to panelist.
Excellent.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, Jeremy, if you can unmute and turn on your camera and tell us about your pump water heater based home space heating system.
Sure. I'll make it brief. We super insulated our house by using rigid foam insulation on the inside right over the old plaster and lath. It worked very well. We also dumped a lot more cellulose in the attic, and that reduced that combined with some window upgrades reduced our heating load by 2/3. So then we were able to heat the house with a water heater, which we did, just electrical resistance. And then we cut that usage in half with a heat pump water heater that we vent to the outside. So, and there's some very interesting things that does. It provides ventilation during the heating season, which our house is tight enough to require now. And we did that 8 years ago for free. City Light gave us $500. GE gave us $400. We got a GE GeoSpring heat pump water heater, and we got the tax credit, even though we got all that money. So it was free. We just replaced it. That was 8 years ago. We just replaced it with a Ream unit. It's the same size, a 50-gallon tank, but this one is connected. So me being an energy geek, that was what I wanted. I wanted this thing to be connected. Not only is it connected to my household network, but it's also available to utilities through the CT 2045 protocol. And I don't know if Seattle City Light will ever get around to using it, but it is something that allows the storage in the tank to work to reduce loads at peak times. And it actually does that in our house because when the house isn't calling for heat, the heat pump will typically run. And so it's just storing up some heat in that tank until we need to use it in the evening. So basically we'll run on that 350 watt heat pump most of the time. It is a hybrid unit. So at times of higher demand, the electrical resistance will kick in for a few minutes. And so it has an algorithm that seems to be doing something. I haven't figured out how it knows when to do these things, but it seems to be smarter than our Nest thermostat. I'll put it that way.
Jeremy, what do you set your thermostat setting at?
I'm 70, so I set it at 70.
Wow. Okay. Yeah.
But we get a lot of passive solar heating. So right now the sun's out, and that is heating our house because we have south-facing windows. So with all that insulation, those BTUs can't really go very far, very fast. And I'll just show you briefly if I can share my screen. Let's see. I'll share that one.
Like a green, yeah, okay. There
So
it is.
these are screenshots from the Ream app. You can see that I have the temp set at 112. It'll go all the way to 140, I think. And then you can see your usage from the the current day and the heavy bars versus the previous day, and you can do that by month, and you can also do it by year. We just started this thing in October, so it will track very nicely and log data for our space heating.
What was your bill before and after your electric bill?
We were in the range of $1,200 a year. And that was prior to the remodel, which we did in 2003 and 4. And we added PV in 2005. Now there's just kind of PV every place we could stick it. So we did get certified net zero in 2016. So it's a little, we're not the usual ratepayer. However, our company did 200 pretty deep energy retrofits in Seattle as part of the Community Power Works program. And every one of those customers, their feedback is the house feels so much better and my energy bills are like, half or something. So this is something this program was beyond the low income weatherization programs that they typically have. So kind of reached into, middle income households, but it was very successful. We did about 600 energy audits.
So excellent. So is there some way you could share some of this material with us offline, and then we'll share it with the participants? And I want to get back now to the audience. I appreciate this very much, and congratulations. This looks like this is a fabulous case study on if there is a will, there is a way, if I can use that expression.
Yeah, we do have on the Living Futures Trim tab website, there's our case studies up there. I can give you a link to it. How do I unshare? Now I have this thing.
Yeah.
Or can you do it over there?
Well, let me see. I think you have to. I don't think I can, because
I'm looking for it here.
while you're doing the unshare, let me ask.
Oh, here we go. Right, it's a big red button. Sorry.
Oh, got you. So Jim, you had a specific question that you wanted to address, which I think came about relating to hydrogen. So why don't we begin with that question with you?
Thanks, Ahmad, and thanks very much, Jeremy, for letting us draft you on no notice to tell us a very interesting story. And it's the same story that I started with. We need to match, and that Carol talked about, that we need to do efficiency and electrification together. They don't make sense to do them separately. We had a question about the role of green hydrogen in the electricity future. And hydrogen is going to be a very, very important part of our energy future, I think, in a decarbonized world, particularly for high temperature applications and metallurgy and other areas. It may be the answer to decarbonizing air travel, but it's not going to play a big role in residential and commercial building heating or the electricity supply. And the reason is simply one of thermodynamic efficiency. Making hydrogen out of water is about 50% efficient. That is, you get hydrogen back with about 50% of the energy value of the electricity that you put into the electrolysis process. Making electricity out of hydrogen, whether it's in a combustion turbine or a fuel cell, is no more than 60% efficient. And so you wind up with no more than 30% of the original electricity doing useful work, reaching the electric meter to serve the appliances in the home. Whereas battery storage or thermal storage can be 70, 80, even 90% efficient. So the ice storage air conditioner, I think, is going to be a very useful tool in hot climates, and the kind of hot water heating storage system that Jeremy just described has a lot of promise for the heating world. But hydrogen is a wonderful product and a very useful thing, but there's the expense of the electrolyzer, the expense of the compression and transmission and distribution system, the expense of the fuel cells or combustion turbines. And when you're all done, you have very, very low net thermodynamic efficiency. But there will be a lot of applications for hydrogen where those costs and that efficiency loss be affordable. But I don't think it's going to be a big player for heating, cooling, electricity supply.
Great. Thank you. And of course, the discussion can continue offline because it is a topic that keeps coming up quite a bit, hydrogen as well as renewable natural gas. Let me turn to another issue, which I have been thinking about, and several people have asked aspects of that question. It's a complex question, so let me just lay it out in parts, and then I'd invite any one of the panelists who wants to be the first one to respond. So the question is, there are situations where a household currently doesn't have a central air conditioner. They have a gas furnace, they replace it with a heat pump, and now they have both an air conditioner as well as a space heater. And they start using the air conditioner portion of the heat pump in the summer, which they previously didn't have. So is that a good thing or is that not a good thing? Obviously, they're more comfortable, they're enjoying life, but they're spending more on electricity, and more electricity is being used than was previously being used. So that's part A. Part B is, in cases where there are extreme temperatures, and some of those were discussed by Carol, you may need 2 heating systems. I think Jim touched upon it as well. So is that a good outcome? So instead of having 1 heating system, now you have 2. There's redundant capital spending, very low load factor on one of the heating systems. So why don't I just leave it as part A and part B of this, and then we'll get to the other questions. So whoever wants to take it first, go for it. You can do just part A or parts A and B, but please keep it to 1 minute each. Let me ask Alex to begin.
Sure, I'll start off with part A, and I would say in Washington State that's an improvement, partially because as I mentioned, increasing challenges with smoke, and our temperatures in the summer are rising, and we historically have not had AC, and most of us will probably want AC in the future. And so it's a better outcome for folks' lives, makes us more resilient to climate change as a community. So I think it's a good solution there. We're also a winter peaking, our utilities are all winter peaking right now. And so that outcome doesn't mean that our utilities need to increase transmission to be able to meet the load. So I think of that as a positive outcome all around.
Got you. Okay. Carol?
Yeah, I would agree that in Vermont, a lot of homes don't have central AC, and so they've had window units for years. The heat pump, if you're buying an efficient cold climate heat pump, you can cool your home efficiently with that as well, and oftentimes allows them to get rid of those air conditioning units that aren't quite as good for either indoor air quality, as Alex talked about, or cooling itself. With our low income programs where we're able to provide customers with a heat pump, we're actually giving them cooling system, which they wouldn't otherwise be able to have. The other thing about using heat pumps as kind of that secondary fuel source is that in the shoulder seasons in our climate, you can use the cold climate heat pump completely to heat the home. And it's only in the really depths of winter that you might need that fossil fuel backup. And so that is a win for folks who want to reduce their fossil fuel use, whether it's for cost considerations or for the environmental considerations associated with their carbon footprint. So as Alex said, we see it as an improvement to have those options in terms of what you choose to heat with. Okay. Now that controls are able to have heat pumps talking to thermostats and talking to central furnaces and boilers, there's an opportunity to really optimize how you use your energy, and that we see as a win for people as well.
Okay, good. Vail, do you want to comment?
Sure, just quickly on both of them. Part A, right? We are in a slightly different boat than Alex in Washington. We are a summer peaking utility. So yes, there potentially customers that did not have AC before that have heat pumps now for cooling do represent additional load, would add to that peak, would be something we have to plan for. But I would say, just anecdotally, here in New York City, historically very, very hot summers, very, very AC use is very prevalent, right? So anywhere where heat pumps can kind of produce, kind of a better efficiency alternative, that is mostly and largely a positive. On the second piece about backup heat, definitely an important question with regards to, as you said, redundant systems or having kind of backup heat. Some controls that we have in place, right, in our program design, and I saw this kind of come up in the Q&A, to be eligible for our incentives, right, we are expecting that contractors do proper sizing and design, right? So one of the things we have is that the heat pumps must be able to meet at least 90 to 120%, right, the building heating load, right? So from a technical perspective, they must be able to meet the full heating needs of the building, verified through a manual J calc and manual S for sizing. One other key criteria for us on the residential side, right, is we peg eligible equipment to what's called the NEAP Cold Climate Qualified Product List. NEAP is Northeast Energy Efficiency Partnership, right? And one of the main metrics there is there must be a coefficient of performance of at least 1.75 at 5 degrees Fahrenheit. right? So understanding that that even can be a little warm for our northern neighbors up at the very top of New York State, at least here in New York City, that is well below sort of our design criteria, right? So our electric cold climate heat pumps can safely meet the needs year round. But as people are still maintaining backup systems, we do recognize that that is a customer choice, and there's sort of maybe some hesitancy there still, right, to be able to convert to it fully. But kind of a lot of people use the Prius as the example, right? You got to have the hybrids, right, working well, get people comfortable with that before they're fully comfortable with the fully electric vehicle, right? So that's been said a couple of times, and there's some merit there, right, as we slowly transition people fully off of fossil fuel.
Yeah, got you. Good example there. Training wheels is another metaphor that comes to mind. Jim.
I'm a big fan of supplemental heating, particularly in rural areas where outages are common. Having some kind of a supplemental heating system that can keep the house above freezing with no outside support. In urbanized areas, the distribution outages are less frequent and generally have much shorter duration. But pretty much anyone who's served by overhead distribution wires in an area where there are trees is going to experience outages. And we certainly use our gas fireplace and occasionally our wood stove or supplemental heat. During up to a 5-day power outage, our house has remained, I won't say comfortable, but certainly livable. And the point that Will made, that the heat pumps are down to from a COP of say 3 at 47 degrees to a COP of 1.75 at 5 degrees. That means that the heat pump would need to be really giant sized in order to carry the heating load at 5 degrees. And that heat pumps are expensive.
Yes.
And the advantages of a supplemental heat source of some kind is that you can size the heat pump to a commonly used heating level, and that's a much cheaper heat pump. And you get 2 benefits out of your supplemental heating system. 3 days a year when it's really cold, you fire up the supplemental heating system to help avoid an additional $10,000 investment in an oversized heat pump. And then when there's a power outage, maybe 1 day or 2 days a year, you might use your supplemental heat to remain comfortable. So in rural areas, places with overhead distribution wires, I think supplemental heat is very important. In an urbanized area where outages are rare, probably less so.
Great points. Well, all good things must come to an end, unfortunately, and we have come to the end of our allotted time. So Victor, I'm going to hand it back to you, and you can make some comments about when the recording will become available. That was a frequent question, and I want the slides. Will the recording be available? Back to you.
Thanks, Ahmad. First, I'd like to congratulate the moderator and the panelists for a wonderful webinar. Right now, the webinar is being recorded. Typically, within a week, we'll upload it to YouTube. And those should be available. And we do have the slides. We will have to discuss how to make them available to people who've requested them. And just want to conclude with this was so insightful that, as Jim was saying, it's kind of a balancing act between efficiency and electrification. We haven't really talked very much about supporting rate design, but we did talk about that in previous webinars. And it looks like, once again, one size doesn't fit all, that the rural areas have different challenges than urban areas, including the workforce that can really help make this transition. So in any case, we're out of time. Thank you again, everybody. And I have to speak to you offline, Ahmad, about your retirement. That's we'll have to talk about that. Okay, take care, everybody. Thanks
Take
again.
care. Bye-bye.
Very much. Have a good one, everybody.
Thank you.